And I think at that point, this is before the speech, there was a feeling in the room that the US president was potentially being a good sport on it because he was giving out the awards and gesturing. I think where the speech perhaps turned some of the crowd against him was he started talking about some of the individual journalists. So, for example, CNN's Caitlin Collins, he was saying, she never smiles. And you could feel the mood turn a bit colder at that point.
There was increased security as President Trump attended a rescheduled White House Correspondents Dinner overnight. The annual gathering was initially held in April, but brought to an abrupt halt after a gunman stormed through a security checkpoint at the Washington Hilton Hotel before being accosted by the president's Secret Service team. Here's what happened. Just about hear the shooting in the background, and then a lot of cutlery going on the floor as people got under the tables. Now, the president didn't let that incident overshadow the rescheduled dinner, which is only just finished, even joking about it as he took to the stage to address the audience.
Everyone's looking really good tonight, and I know it was not easy finding shoes to go along with your bulletproof vest, which many people didn't want to wear because they'd rather die than look 20 pounds heavier. You know that, right?
Some of these jokes. The event was moved to a much smaller venue this time round with fewer people invited. Among them was Katy Balls, Washington editor of The Times and Sunday Times. Hi there, Katy.
Hello.
So when did it finish then? Wasn't that long ago, was it?
About an hour or so ago.
OK, and what's your immediate reaction to what happened and what went on and the jokes that you heard?
I think the general feeling on leaving was it was a very long night, and part of that was a very long speech from the US president, whereas we've already heard from some of the clips just there. I'm not sure every joke landed in the way that the US president intended.
Was there a comedian this time? Because every time I think of the White House Correspondents Dinner, I always go back to Michelle Wolf in 2018 and what she did, and it's been a bit patchy ever since. Did you actually have a turn this time, as opposed to the president?
So instead of a comedian, they had a mentalist. Read from that what you want.
That means something slightly different in America to over here, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. So you had someone reading everyone's minds. So it was more... the president's speech went on for over an hour.
Wow.
And then straight from that, you went to the Mentalist Act, where he was kind of reading people's minds to guess what they were thinking, guessing numbers, roping in Mike Waltz, the ambassador to the UN for the Trump administration, and other administration-linked figures to guess words and so forth. And I think that's partly because if you think back to last year, there was no comedian because the comedian had to be cancelled because they decided the comedian had been too rude about Donald Trump. So I think this was seen as a safer alternative.
I mean, did you feel, speaking of safe, did you feel safe tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I attended the White House Correspondents Dinner earlier this year where, of course, there were shots and everyone was told to get under a table, referenced tonight in the president's speech. And, you know, it was evacuated and the event was cut short. But this event did feel safe. I don't think it was a particular concern. They changed venue. It was much smaller. And I think you could even tell going in that they were taking security, I think, more seriously than they took it a few months ago.
Right. And so aside from the duff jokes and the mentalist, what did the president have to say?
I mean, it was a very long speech, but I'm not sure it said that much if we actually go through it. I mean, he did talk about Iran briefly, saying it was going very well. That's something he says a lot. Some will look at what's actually happening and think that, you know, it's out of the US's hands to a degree. I think when you think about other parts of the speech, I mean, I suppose what's interesting is if you think about Donald Trump's first term, he has always refused to speak at this dinner. This dinner has been cited by MAGA figures as an example of how incestuous DC is when it comes to the relationship with the media and politicians. This idea that it's all too cozy in the establishment. So the very fact that this year he decided to speak at it is interesting. But I think we saw in those jokes that he couldn't quite work out how to pitch it. So there are some phrases about certain journalists where we all sat there thinking, has he just decided not to read the script? Because it's got a little bit awkward or he doesn't really mean tonight. There are a few moments like that.
Well, there's another clip here where he directly addresses the fact that a lot of his audience would be hostile towards him, which I think we can bring you. Maybe not. There was a series of awards given out, which I understand is traditional, and many of the people had won awards for stories about Donald Trump. Again, that kind of awkwardness is, I suppose, as a journalist, what you would rather than a cosy kind of affair.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it was quite an awkward setup, and everyone was slightly in on the joke because you had, as you say, these annual awards, which is the White House Correspondents Association Awards. And one of the awards, for example, was the Wall Street Journal story about Epstein and Donald Trump, a story that we know the US president was very unhappy about at the time. And it is custom that the president gives out the awards. So you had some quite interesting body language and gestures as this was all happening. And I think at that point, this was before the speech, there was a feeling in the room that the US president was potentially being a good sport on it because he was giving out the awards and gesturing. I think where the speech perhaps turned some of the crowd against him was he started talking about some of the individual journalists. So, for example, CNN's Caitlin Collins, he was saying, she never smiles. And you could feel the mood turn a bit colder at that point.
And he went into lots of personal remarks, didn't he, as well, particularly about the female journalists, which he has a habit of doing. Let's just hear Donald Trump, as I mentioned earlier, talking about the press turning on him.
I read a report, I get 93% negative publicity. 93. So how the hell did I win the election by so much? Think of it. I don't think that's true. I can't believe it's 93. In the 80s, maybe, but not 93. But this place is really the largest group of Trump derangement syndrome people ever put together at one time, I suspect.
I mean, Katy, although you said the mood in the room changed when he started singling out individual journalists, I mean, if he did mention your name, it would almost be a mark of respect, wouldn't it?
I think there's two ways of looking at it, right? Like, as in, there are lots of journalists who enjoy the notoriety of a mention, and there's also a sense of playing into the game. So I don't think CNN would pride itself on wanting to be Trump's favorite publication. If anything, their viewership probably likes the fact that Trump is quite skeptical about CNN. So, there is space for lots of opinions on this. I think the point is, though, if it crosses into talking about a female journalist's appearance and she doesn't smile enough, the few times saying they're so beautiful, but why are they so nasty? That's when people start to take a bit more offense. But to your point, there are lots of journalists who delight at being mentioned or noticed by the US president. And there was also an interesting bit in his speech where he talked about so, for example, I'm sure many people know, but ultimately this situation where lots of journalists in DC have the US president's phone number and just call him, and they get these 30-second to 3-minute interviews sometimes, and we'll say exclusive interview. And he said that he had been asking his press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, have any of the press got in touch for a while, and that he kept almost being stonewalled, saying, they haven't got in touch. And at that point, he thought, well, I'm going to start putting my number out there, which is why he picks up to journalists. And then he said, but that was a terrible idea because now I'm just constantly inundated with these calls. But this is a president who likes the media attention, and he likes the fact that he is being talked about. And there are obviously journalists who also like the fact that he will talk to them. So for all the pantomime of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, I think there is an aspect where everyone is slightly playing into the game.
And you do wonder to what extent Donald Trump is a creation of the media and the media's responsibility. But he didn't just have a go at journalists, Donald Trump. He started sort of raising his sights to other public figures. Here's him having a go at Bruce Springsteen.
And what about Bruce Springsteen? What the hell happened to that guy? He looks like hell. I don't care what anyone says. I'm not supposed to say. I'm sure he doesn't like the way I look, but I don't look so bad. But at a recent concert, Bruce, all he did was talk politics. He ought to run for office. That'd be interesting. But all he talked about, he made 4 political speeches in his 3-hour show. The tour has been renamed Bored in the USA.
When you're having a go, I don't know whether there is an equivalent of an American national treasure, but Bruce Springsteen is probably the closest thing that you'd get to that. Having a pop at him is not necessarily wise, as you, again, heard from the reaction there. What was it like to be in the room for all this?
Yeah, again, I think almost the president pointed it out, though, where you can define it in different ways, but he did say this room has the biggest case of Trump derangement syndrome. Now, you can also say it's a room of neutral journalists. I think listeners can make up their own minds, but effectively, this is not Trump's home crowd. This was the opposite of speaking at a Trump rally or getting the mega base. This was ultimately largely a room that has baggage with Trump, to be mild, and many in the room do not like the US president. So therefore, most of what he said was not going to land particularly well. And I think he knew that going in. On the Bruce Springsteen point, Bruce Springsteen recently played in Washington, D.C., for example, and I think that those political comments did actually rub quite a lot of White House staff the wrong way, because many of them were at the concert as he was saying it. So perhaps that fed back.
You do sound a little tired, Katy, and I'm sorry to keep you up a lot longer than you perhaps otherwise would have been. But before you go, just give us your sort of overall assessment of the evening as an event. Did you enjoy it?
It's a strange event. I've gone to it depends how you define it. If we define the event that lasted an hour and a bit, I've been to 3 White House Correspondents Dinner. If you define it as just the full, then this is my second, because I also went last year. And I would have to say the problem with last year was there was no president, because the US president refused to go. There was no comedian, because the White House Correspondents Association cancelled the comedian over jokes they made about Donald Trump that were deemed offensive. So by comparison, this event for a president and an entertainment act was superior. As for the event itself, I think it's quite different to how British journalists do things. A large section is awards for US journalists and speeches about US journalists, and a sense of applauding one another, which I don't think there was quite a British equivalent of.
Yeah.
But for an experience, yes. And I'm not sure. I mean, Trump did suggest that he was willing to do it again. Let's see if he is held to that and decides that's still a good idea after he sees the reaction to tonight's event.
He also apparently said that he was going to be running for a third and possibly fourth term, but I guess that would be one of his jokes rather than anything else. Katy Balls, correspondent in Washington for the Times and Sunday Times, thank you so much for staying up a little later than you expected to talk to us here on Times Radio.